John Boucher appears to be he was the popular candidate, was he, for taking over this role? Seems to be well liked across all divides. I mean, I'm talking journalists, police and citizens as my divides. But he seems to be a guy that's very well respected, has had a very clean career, and there's a lot of hopes for the Kenova Report he's been working on.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very, seasoned police officer. He has a very long and prestigious career in several different police forces. And he's someone that would obviously have been already known to us because he was the head of Operation Kenova, which, just to remind people, Operation Kenova is the investigation into collusion with the informer who we knew as Stakeknife, who is Freddie Scappatisci, who recently died. He was asked to investigate the murders carried out by him. Freddie Scappatisci was the head of the IRA's internal security, or the Nutton Squad as they were called, who was sent to investigate informers or what went wrong in IRA operations if they were compromised. And it turns out the entire time he was the highest ranking agent within the IRA and had been working for the military intelligence for many, many years. And so Kenova was headed up by John Boutcher, who we've all interviewed in that role, so had all got to know pretty well before he applied for the PSNI Chief Constable job.
So who ordered that Kenova report, or how did that come about?
That came about because some of the families had had asked for fresh investigations into their loved one's murder. And at the time, who would have been the head of the director of public prosecutions at the time, Barry McGrory, had passed that on to the PSNI. The PSNI's then Chief Constable George Hamilton had said, look, we can't investigate this because it'd be the police investigating the police sort of thing. So instead, we're going to call in an outside person to investigate it, and John Boutcher then was appointed to head up Kenova, and that was about 5 years ago. So that report is finished, but I suppose one of the hurdles in John Boutcher becoming Chief Constable, and by the way, John Boutcher applied to be the Chief Constable of the PSNI in 2019, and he was interviewed for that post but was unsuccessful. Simon Byrne instead took the job, and Simon Byrne's career as Chief Constable came to a crashing end. And let's not say he didn't leave in the best of circumstances, and in fact has not been seen or heard of since. So I suppose for Boutcher reapplying for that job after not getting in 2019, it's sort of a vindication of him. The policing board basically had to call on him to come, like the night on the white horse, to try and save them from the absolute shambles that the PSNI was in. So, if you applied for a job to get it 5 years ago, and then 5 years later they came begging you to come back and help them try and fix things, you would feel like you'd been vindicated in the first place, wouldn't you, for not getting the job originally?
But and maybe I'm wrong, but would he have been, he must have got a really good overview of all that has gone on in the north and what he's facing into and the problems because of that 5-year investigation in Kenova, and what he's been looking at, because some of the stuff that has been alleged, and it's clearly that the RUC handlers of Freddie Scappatisci were told certain murders were going to happen and basically did nothing about it. Now that's a very simple version of what he's been looking at, but he's really pulled back the layers of things that went on, very uncomfortable things that went on in Northern Ireland during a particular period. Something that we all want to move on from, but you can't move on without recognising that happened.
Yeah, and the thing about Kenova is that John Boutcher told us at the time in his previous role that he had access to intelligence files that no one had seen before. His clearance was at the top, at the highest ranking security clearance you could have. Some of those documents were able to be disclosed to the Kenova team. Some of them were so top secret that only John Boutcher himself was allowed into a room to read those documents, and wasn't even allowed to remove them. But it was of the highest ranking intelligence possible. His report should be released sometime, if not this month, next month. I mean, it's ready. It's currently with the PSNI. We will get on to that, about how that has caused some difficulties. But I'm dying to read. I'm fascinated to read this report, not just because I hope it gives those families, some of whom I got to know quite well, I hope it gives them some degree of truth and about what actually happened to their loved ones, and in some cases vindication. Because remember, a lot of these families won't speak publicly publicly because they still carry around the shame. You know, almost everyone that Freddie Scappatisci killed was from a Republican community in North and West Belfast. He was investigating other IRA men, if you like. So, and then these funerals of these Republicans that were accused of being informers, the worst thing that you could have been accused of being, and back in, during that conflict, their funerals were often tiny, attended only by, very close family and friends. They would have happened, early in the morning just to avoid crowds and people seeing what was happening. It was almost like the shame was carried with them. And in many cases, they either weren't informers or they were very, very low level informers. I suppose what you and I grew to call them £10 touch, people who would have had very limited information to be passing on anyway. Some of them were more high ranking informers, but also a lot of them were sacrificed to save Freddie Scappatisci himself. So when people got suspicious, that there was an informer higher up within the ranks, his handlers would have said to him, well, X, Y, and Z is working for us. Why don't you leak that out? So some people were deemed expendable, if you like. They were done, their use was over, to save Freddie Scappatisci's skin. And also I'm curious to know as to when that work ended. So the IRA claimed that after 1990, there was an event of which Sandy Lynch, who was another police informer, had been captured by the IRA and he'd been interrogated by Freddie Scappatisci. Freddie Scappatisci left the house where he was being held. Danny Morrison, who was then the director of publicity for Sinn Féin, showed up. Danny Morrison said he was showing up to arrange a press conference because Sandy Lynch had basically said that his handlers had asked him to set up two very senior Republicans. They said they were going to get him to say all this on camera. But as he arrived at the house, so too did the RUC, and they were all arrested and jailed. They ended up having those convictions quashed. Now, they claim that after that entire unit were stood down and that nobody was operational again after that, including Freddie Scappatisci. That would sort of tie in what Freddie Scappatisci told the Cook Report. Do you remember the Cook Report? This is we'll show our age. We'll all have to show our age. Now, the Cook Report obviously was one of those sort of like undercover, sort of crime investigation programs many years ago. He told journalists from the Cook Report as well that he hadn't been with the IRA in about 3 years, and that was in about 93. But there are other people whose loved ones were killed after that who are convinced that Stakeknife or Freddie Scappatisci played a part in their loved one's murder. So Kenova should be able to shed some light on that. When did Freddie Scappatisci stop being an IRA enforcer? So that's one of the things I'm interested in.
And for Boucher, it's a window into Scappatisci. It's a window into the murders that the families really want proper answers for, and they want to know was there collusion. But it's a window into the force he's taking over because, some of the legacy of that RUC must be still lingering there in that PSNI, or certainly the skeletons have come some of the way forward with the PSNI as they try to kind of leave them behind. So he's getting a real look into what once was a poison chalice. Maybe it's not seen as that anymore, the PSNI, but he knows what he's handling. He knows what he's dealing with now. And presumably if he got to see all those top secret files, he knows all the dirt on everybody that might be beneath him.
Yes, well, there's the fact that he does know the inner workings and what happened in that time. That obviously, I would say that gives him an advantage as a chief constable, because we have had English chief constables in the past with varying degrees of success. Some of the things that they struggle with initially is trying to get to grips. Northern Ireland is a very specific policing, a specific place to police, not just because there's still a security threat, from distant Republicans. We still have active loyalist paramilitaries, but it's also policing here can get very political. It was that political aspect of it that ended Simon Byrne's career quite abruptly. And some of them struggle to get to grips with that in a timely fashion and make, gaffes immediately. I mean, for instance, Simon Byrne was only in the post a couple of weeks and he was given he was at a talk, I think it was at Queen's University, and he said we'll do everything we can to get the dissident Republicans. If we need to take their children off, and we will. I mean, threatening to take children off people because of the sense of, well, you can imagine the outrage that caused. John Boutcher's not going to make any of those kind of gaffes because he knows this place really well. He knows the politics of it. He knows how it operates. He knows the sensitivities around policing, and he knows that security landscape very well. He's also, I suppose to say, he's not a career policeman as such. He's a proper cop. Do you know what I mean? He was a detective. He's always worked in crime or counter-terrorism. He was a member of that, famous London flying squad that was, chasing after the armed robbers, the train robbers and all of that sort of thing. He's a proper policeman. So that should help him with the rank and file and trying to get them on board. But as well as that, he already knows this place. And it doesn't harm that he also has relationships with the media, because he was very open with the media in Operation Kenova. He did do a number of interviews, but also he would have been someone who would have been quite accessible to the media. You didn't have to go through 10 press officers to get to him.
Yes.
So we already know him, and that I think will help him as well. It doesn't do any harm. The problem with a lot of, I suppose, the previous chief constables is, and I keep going back to Simon Byrne, I don't want to be unfair to him, but he was uncomfortable in front of the media. You could see he was uncomfortable. He was awkward, and his mannerisms were awkward, and he just didn't like doing it. You could sense that often, so he didn't do it very often. He hated those sort of one-to-one type interviews. And he also, what I noticed about Simon Byrne is he used very police speak, if you know what I mean. He used that language of, the police academy sort of training language. Whereas John Boutcher is a very straight talking guy. He just speaks, he can communicate with the sort of man or woman on the street type thing, rather than speak like a policeman.
And I have to say, what you're describing there is like how we might describe some of the members of the criminal fraternity, that they can almost smell the fear. Like we media can smell that fear of people, can't we? And it's not good, because then you just, it doesn't make for good relations at all. Somebody who is confident of themselves dealing with you, it's look, the media is a hungry animal, and if it's fed, it remains somewhat satisfied, and that's a very good PR advice maybe for people out there. And that's just,
if they're defensive with you, you're defensive with them. Exactly. And all of a sudden the relationship becomes quite fractured, and
that's it.
And that's,
So, not looking for the man's address, but has he been living in the north of Ireland? Is he actually living in a community in Northern Ireland, or has he been over and back to the UK?
So he would have just came back and forward, and then previously as Operation Kenova, there wouldn't have been any threat to him. So I'm assuming he could have quite easily stayed in hotels, in and around. That's very different now. The chief constable, he now has personal protection officers who will be with him constantly. I asked him that question because obviously the criticism of English chief constables in the past, and the PSNI was 22 years old last week. It celebrated its 22nd birthday, if you like. So that transfer from the RUC to the PSNI, and I remember it so well. I was working as a journalist at the time. I remember, working on the Sunday for the Monday's paper, and the Sunday night at midnight, all the the signs came down off the police stations. They changed them from RUC to PSNI. So in those 22 years, we've had, Ronnie Flanagan was the chief constable when that first happened. He was changed from the RUC to the PSNI. We got Hugh Ord then, who was English but understood this place very, very well. We've had, temporary chief constables such as Judith Gillespie and Colin Cramphorn. Again, he was English. Judith Gillespie was from Northern Ireland. We had Matt Baggett, who was disastrous. Matt Baggett, I think he was the head of the sort of Christian Police Officers Association or something.
Oh, God.
He liked to see the good in people, even when there was none. and that was his downfall. He came here as, the peacetime chief constable. He was going to put, officers on horseback and up and down the Falls Road. No, it was all nonsense. And then the Loyalist flag protest started, and he just floundered after that. It wasn't good. So after that, we had George Hamilton, who was ex-RUC. He did a fairly good job in his time in the job. And then we went to Simon Byrne, who was, let's say, gaff prone is probably being kind to him. He was constantly saying things that just, caused either public outrage. One of the things that he did.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to actually go through his top 5.
Well, threatening people to take their children off them if he thought they were involved in, in dissident republicanism was practically day one. He was here for a week and a half or something at the time. That year, on Christmas Day, he went to Crossmaglen police station, which is still, it's now being knocked down. It's going to be demolished, but it was still like a big sort of fortified base from that time of, when you could only get helicoptered in and out across Crossmaglen. The security forces, the army and the police, they couldn't walk the streets across Crossmaglen back during the Troubles. So that police station's like a relic almost of the past. He visited there on Christmas Day, and for some reason got a picture taken of himself stand beside these boys carrying guns that you could have went hunting elephants, with these big massive guns. Somebody actually messaged me at the time and said there's like night vision sights on those and it's broad daylight. Like what they were just, the guns were made to make us look as, you know, as sort of angry as possible, as big as possible. And he stopped beside these boys and it was like Merry Christmas from Crossmaglen type thing. And the people of South Armagh went ballistic, absolutely ballistic. And they went, this is not our community. What on earth are you doing? And as a result of that, there had to be the Crossmaglen, you know, review of policing in the entire area, which then recommended that police station be knocked down. You know, it was what he did then, I suppose, it finished him off, if you like, was there was an incident where during the COVID restrictions, there was a commemoration into a loyalist attack and Sean Graham bookmakers. The families had it outside because, and they actually put on Facebook, said to people not to come to it. It was only for families. They were laying flowers, and as they arrived, 2 police officers arrived. The police officers were both 2 rookies. They were both, you know, less than a year in the job. They said that they didn't know what was going on. They just radioed through and said, look, there's a whole lot of people here. It looks like a breach of COVID. And then they approached them and it turned really nasty really quickly. You can see the videos of that online. And they arrested and led away in handcuffs Mark Sykes, who was one of the people who had survived that attack. He was shot multiple times. The optics of that, as you can imagine, were atrocious. Simon Byrne then disciplined those officers without waiting on an investigation. The Police Federation challenged that, and then a High Court judge said that it was unfair, it was actually illegal. He shouldn't have, and that he bowed to pressure from Sinn Féin to discipline these officers without actually waiting on the full investigation. He had managed to sort of ride out that until there was an emergency meeting of the policing board. He walked out of that meeting, we're all standing outside. He comes out absolutely furious. He says, I'll not be resigning. And also, I can't talk about that ruling because we're now thinking about appealing it. Well, you know, that was it. The Police Federation went mental. And he didn't survive less than, I think it was a couple of 24 hours, maybe 48 hours after that. And he didn't even show up to resign himself. The chair of the policing board had to read out his resignation letter. I have not seen or heard of him since. I don't know where he is. I'm assuming he's went somewhere, but there's very limited access to Wi-Fi or telephone, so people can't annoy him, but he hasn't spoke since. So that was the end of him. We were then left with no chief constable, but also the deputy chief constable, Mark Hamilton, is off on the sick. He had some sort of operation and has came back again, so there was no deputy chief constable either. There was basically nobody in charge. That went on for quite a few weeks. And then the policing board appointed an interim chief constable, who was John Boutcher. And that required the sign-off of the NIO, because as well as having no head of police, we also have no government, because our government has collapsed.
I was just going to point that out. There was nobody in charge.
Nobody is in charge.
Or the government. Simon Byrne,
He's actually a nice man when you spoke to him. I don't know whether nice is, you know, good enough to cut it in the PSNI. He was just, you know, I suppose he had a strange character. You know, you wouldn't have said, oh, you could be mates with him. You know, listen, like you're like myself. This is how I judge people. Could you go for a drink with that person? Yes or no? And he was a no. You know?
Okay, so that was, yeah.
It would have been a no. If I had to sit in the room and have a pint with Simon Byrne, it would have been the most boring drink of my life.
Yeah.
You know, there's some people in life you think, well, you know, they're probably good crack outside of their official role, and he wasn't one of them. He tried, you know, to change a lot of things. He didn't have the money to change it. Then he started sort of cutting from the bottom. They call it sort of taking the low-hanging fruit out, getting away rid of community officers and stuff. It was just all quite disastrous near the end. And he's left the PSNI is in a complete crisis, the crisis of the massive data breach, you know, where 10,000. Yeah.
Of course, I was going to say to you, like, I mean, of the kind of his top 5 gaffes, that wasn't one of them, but that was, I almost imagine seeing intelligence files flapping in the breeze down a roadway. Yeah. But that's literally...
Within days, what happened was there was the massive data breach, and that someone asked an FOI request about, you know, how many people are detectives, sergeants, whatever. And for some reason, the entire Excel sheet that showed the names of every single police officer and civilian member of staff, what station they worked in. And probably more important for my line of work is it also showed what budget they were paid for out of, you know, the main budget was obviously just the main PSNI budget. Some were paid out of, you know, special say the NIO wanted to run a pilot scheme to give money towards PSNI, they would be paid out of that. And some were paid out of the security budget, and that's MI5's budget. And we were able to work out which police officers were working for intelligence or not, just by looking through that data breach, which we were then all told to immediately delete. So everybody, I mean, within days, you know, there was criminals saying to me, "Have you seen that?" There was, you know, dissident Republicans asking me had I seen it. There was loyalists who had seen it. Everybody had sight of it. He was managing slowly, I think, to try and write his way out of that. But then a senior police officer was sent round to take, they have a name for it, which has left me right now, but it's a form that they had to go and speak to people who felt as a result of that, that they were somehow under a greater threat, and why they felt they were under a greater threat. You know, and it might be because my kid plays GA for such and such team and I take him there on a Saturday, or, you know, I'm constantly at such and such football ground, which is in a nationalist area, or my mum lives. So, and some of those documents were sat on top of a police car and the police officer drove away and they fluttered all over the road. It was lucky it was the weekend there was a storm that weekend, and I think most turned to paper mache within an hour, but it was lucky that the bad weather did, because I don't think they could be recovered. There was police officers running around on the hard shoulder of the M2 trying to pick them up, but they were long gone by then.
Just catastrophic.
Yeah.
Now, Boucher, and I was recently interviewing the author Ricky O'Rourke. I think his book is just simply called Freddie Scappaticci from memory.
Yeah.
But, and at the time, so it was about maybe a month ago or 6 weeks ago, he was saying that this report was due, this Boutcher report, the Kenova report was due. Do you think they delayed it because of this announcement? Do you think they wanted him in place as the Chief Constable before it's released?
Yeah, I mean, what John Boutcher has said when he took the interim role, and again what he said the other day when he was appointed as Chief Constable, is, I have finished anyway. That report is done, it's dusted. Whether I'm Chief Constable or not Chief Constable, I would have had no more dealings with that report. It is done. It went for what they call national security clearance, so it went basically to the spooks and they have looked through it. They have cleared it for release. It then went to the Public Prosecution Service, who went to look at it, see if there was anything in it that could compromise a future prosecution. They okayed it for release, and then it was sent to the police. What John Boutcher has said is that he has recused himself from any more dealings, but that it'll have to be published by the police, and then the police will have to say what the response to it's going to be. He's handed that off to a guy called Chris Todd, who is currently the interim Deputy Chief Constable, because remember, as I already said, the Deputy Chief Constable's off on the 6th, so we have a temporary Deputy Chief Constable. He's going to be dealing with that. Now, what you would think is, would the families be angry and say, why is this man now working for the PSNI when he was, you know, investigating this report? Boutcher has managed something that I don't think many people could have, and that he's managed to keep those families all on board. He grew a very close relationship with them. They all have his phone number. You know, they can all ring him up at any time. He talks to them constantly. He said during his press conference when he was appointed as the permanent Chief Constable, that morning the 3 of those families had rang him up to congratulate him and say good luck on your first day. The prior to applying for the job, that some of them were saying, you know, we'll fill in the application form for you, we'll lobby the policing board, and they wanted him to take it on or he wouldn't have done it, and he remained good friends with those families going forward. But I suppose it's perception, isn't it? Perception is he's now working for the organisation that he was investigating, so how is that going to work? The issue, I suppose, with the Kenova report is it's unlikely to result in any prosecutions. Freddie Scappaticci's dead, and also we have legacy legislation that puts an end to all investigations anyway. That's currently being challenged in the High Court. The result of that we'll know, because those challenges are going to be heard quite quickly. We'll know very soon. So, but possibly by maybe spring next year, that legislation will come in to place permanently, and there won't be any more prosecutions anyway. But it's more a truth recovery document. And I think it's a good template to see, can something like Kenova, could that work in terms of trying to solve our legacy and trying to bring closure to people and trying to get the truth out there. You know, I expect it to be a fascinating document, because he has released parts of his investigation as he went along. If you look on the website, he places, you know, this is what we found so far, this is where we are so far. And even that was made for interesting reading. You know, it's very detailed. So he says the families are all on board with him. They're all happy enough that he's doing that job. I haven't heard anything different. There's nobody has said, you know, we're unhappy that he is doing that job, or, you know, we think that there's a perceived conflict of interest. It's certainly the optics of it might have looked like that. So that's why he keeps on addressing it and saying, you know, I will not take anything more to do with the PSNI part. I'm recusing myself from that. Somebody else we'll deal with that. So we should get the publication of it, I expect, very soon. He's probably glad that not have to take anything more to do with it, because he's enough to be getting on with. Currently, the state of the PSNI is, it's in a bit of a shambles, so there's an awful lot of work to be done. He has a heavy in tray to look after as it is.
Before we talk a bit about that, he does sound to be a good communicator one way or another, and perhaps the relationship with the families would tell you maybe he's an honourable man. But I was sort of relating there earlier to some of the secrets he knows about the RUC that may have transferred into the PSNI. And so would there be anybody left that was involved in the policing of any of that or anything around that that might still be in the PSNI, or would they have all retired and gone?
Most of them retired. There was a big patent payoff, big redundancy payoff. They all got, vast payoffs and fairly lucrative pensions. They're mainly gone. I think that his biggest problem will not be anything to do with the Kenova stuff. It'll more to be to do with when he's a reformer. That's what he does. He goes from police forces that are in crisis, and he reforms and changes things. He's going to have to do some serious reform of the PSNI. And he'll meet resistance there, because there are people who are just, first of all, they're set in their ways. They've maybe got quite a cushy number going as it is. They don't want to change. They don't want reform, and he'll probably find himself butting heads as he goes along. And when that happens, as you know, people then start briefing against you when you're doing something that nobody likes, and start trying to then twist things around. So, I did ask him about that when I was speaking to him the other day and interviewing him, and he's quite aware that could happen, and that has happened in previous police forces where he's been in and tried to make changes, and he knows that. But he seems the type that's if, well, we're going to do this and we're going to move along, and if you don't like it, there's a door, off you go.
And what are the kind of problems, apart from, we've spoken before about Catholic PSNI officers, maybe the threats they face within their own community, and that sort of ongoing effort to make it more inclusive. But I noticed that story about Emma Bond. Is there a little bit of kind of sexism, bit of that?
There's a real misogyny problem going on there. When the data breach happened, all of a sudden we had all these police officers queuing up to talk to you. As usually they hide from the media, and all of a sudden, they were like on speed dial. And a lot of them were complaining about that there was, casual sectarianism and misogyny. Emma Bond was one of the most senior females in the PSNI. She was in charge of the Derry Strabane area, the first female police officer ever to take on that role. She left. She's now an assistant chief constable with Police Scotland. And you've only to look at the Police Scotland's executive team, and I think there's something like 3 or 4 members of the PSNI, former members of the PSNI in it, to show that they've got an issue there with women seem to get to a certain level and then they leave. So the most senior police officer would have been Barbara Gray. She's currently a deputy commissioner with the Metropolitan Police. As I said, Emma Bond's in Police Scotland. John Boutcher said he phoned Emma Bond. He doesn't know her, but in his first morning of the job, he phoned her to say that there would be learning from that ruling. She won that unfair employment. She took a fair employment tribunal against the PSNI. She accused him of sexism and misogyny. It was upheld on every count. I think she got something like £30,000 of a payout. But the report itself, the actual ruling, is about 90 odd pages long, and you can even see him skimming through it, levels of misogyny, in terms of that sort of like when car did she get that job type thing. It was a lot of that going on. I asked him about that, and I'll tell you how. When it comes to misogyny or senior female police officers, John Boutcher's married to one of the most senior inspectors in the Metropolitan Police,
right?
A lady called Heidi Boutcher, and who is a very successful policewoman in her own right. So I don't think that he'd have much truck with people, not helping to or promote or encourage female police officers, because I don't think he'd get away with that in his own house. So he had said he had phoned her, and he actually was very open about the fact that there's a serious problem there. He had said that out of 19, there's 19, I think it's like chief superintendents, and he was told that 3 were women. And when he looked at it, there was only 1 woman who's currently acting up as assistant chief constable. Another one's seconded to Downing Street. She's over working in London. Another one's off on long-term sick. So there's technically only 1 person of chief superintendent above within the in that female group of 19 officers. So that group of 19 male officers, there is only 1 who's a woman. So they have a real issue when it comes to keeping women who seem to think And he actually said, look, there was a job recently, a promotion recently, and 5 women applied for it and didn't get an interview. And I'm going to go back and check. It might be a very valid reason, but I can go back to check why and see why they didn't. So I would say you'll see a change maybe there. Yeah, I think that when a man has a strong, successful woman in their life, it does make maybe a difference in their perception about how they view things. You would think probably looking at Jump Out Trees, that sort of old school cop that, might have that sort of casual, misogyny in it. But, once you hear about his personal circumstances, you realise there's none of that going on. So, yeah, that's a real issue. Not just Catholic police officers, but as I said, female police officers, people from minority groups. I looked through those 10,000 names, and if you're looking for names that don't sound traditionally Irish or Northern Irish, you could have counted them on one hand. The fact is they've got a real issue there, attracting people. We have such a thriving now migrant population, and yet we're not seeing those people joining the PSNI. So it has an issue attracting there and changing that.
So it's ultimately to drag it forward into the current world. It sounds like a very old-fashioned organisation. It's probably been bogged down by a lot of what's gone on, and by that big dramatic, what was pitched as a big dramatic change from the RUC to the PSNI, the more inclusive. Change happens very slowly in institutions, doesn't it? So
there was, and Patton was never fully realised. The Patton Report's an amazing, piece of work, and it's it's held up as a gold standard of policing reform around the world. But it was never fully realised or never fully implemented because there was people within the RUC still there at the time were completely resistant to it. And that type of, I suppose, sexism or misogyny that came from the old fashioned, I suppose, policing. Some of that, it might be, I suppose I'm actually like in a bizarre way, I'm going to quote the Barbie movie where they say, oh no, the patriarchy still exists, we just hide it better now. Do you know what I mean? It's just better hidden now. That's the case. It's just better. They're better at hiding what's going on. But yeah, there's still a real issue there. You can see that. I mean, Paula Hillman, who was one of the women who would have been tipped to be a future assistant or deputy chief constable, is currently with the Guards. She took herself off down south, as did quite a few of her colleagues. So we're seeing that drain as well, where people go to other forces, be it the Met, Police Scotland, to the Guards, wherever. They're not staying in the PSNI. And if you were chief constable, you'd have to say, "Why are we losing all this talent to other forces? What is it that makes them think that they don't have a career in the PSNI?"
What are they paying?
Well, I'll tell you, the pay is probably quite similar, but the issue is obviously there's a threat. The police officers here, they still get up and look under their car every morning. I'm assuming you go to Police Scotland, you live a much freer life. You go down to the Guards, you live a much freer life. You're able to go out for a drink with your mates, take your family out for dinner at the weekend. You're not worried that you can only go to this area or go to that area. You have to look under your car. I'm sure there's obviously still a threat to those people working in crime ops or investigating those big drug gangs, but they don't have that sort of ongoing distant threat. That might be like a specific investigation, that threat, rather than just a blanket threat to all officers. So it's probably feels much freer working for another force. But at the same time too, if you came from here and you joined the police and you lived here, you would join them for a very specific reason. You're joining them probably because you wanted to do that job. And the fact that people like Emma Bond not just left feeling very aggrieved to the point where she took a fair employment case, that's not good either.
And what sort of pay is it? I'll ask you that question again, Miss Morris.
The chief constable's pay is
$220,000,
the chief constable's job, 220,000 plus all the extras and bonuses that go along with it.
You're like a politician there.
Yeah. So no, I think it's 230. It might be. It is a very chief constable's job is a very well paid job. Yeah. But the lower down, it isn't. It's quite low paid initially when they first go in. And to take on a job like that doesn't have great pay, but comes with a great deal of risk. It wouldn't attract me, or I wouldn't be something I'd be looking at my children to do.
Wouldn't like to face into what Boucher has to drag it further forward, but maybe he's the right man for the job, and hopefully.
We'll find out soon enough. He did say when we said congratulations, he says, well, come back in 6 months and ask me congratulations. Does he still think that then? But he seems very committed to it. He does say he's going to live in Northern Ireland, and he's looking to buy somewhere here, and he has spoken to his, as I said, police officer wife about that, and they've discussed it. There used to be a house that belonged to the policing board were the chief constables, if they didn't live here, that they lived in this house, heavily sort of fortified armed house. And it was sold when George Hamilton became PSNI chief constable, because he'd been a deputy chief constable and he just stayed in his own house, which was already, bulletproof windowed anyway. And so that house was sold. So Simon Byrne, while he had many faults, he saved the policing budget a fortune, because when he came here however many days a week. His family stayed in England. There's an apartment, like a flat inside Knock headquarters, and it sounds absolutely fucking dreadful. Knock headquarters is not the cheeriest, happiest place. I can only imagine what it's like at night, when all the staff go home, cluttered around there on your own. And he stayed in the flat in Knock for his entire time that he was here. He never bought anywhere to live. He never had, a house to go home to. He had this, and apparently it's not the fanciest of places. So John Boucher said he does intend to buy somewhere here. He's not intending on selling his house in England, but he is intending to buy somewhere here, and he got quite upset when I said, English chief constables have accused of being part-timers. And he said, in my career, no one's ever called me a part-timer. If I commit to something, I commit to it fully. So, we'll see, because the thing first off is he has to win back over the rank and file officers who are completely disillusioned, but also the public. Public confidence in policing is not great at the minute. The Belfast Telegraph did a poll, and I think it was something like 16% only said they had full confidence in the PSNI. So he has to tackle that as well. So, as I said, we'll go back in 6 months and see how mark his homework and see how he's doing then. But
hopefully the Kenova Report will be the first step to that, because there is an awful lot of that in the ether, talk about collusion and all the rest of it. And I suppose you mentioned 22 years the PSNI is in existence now. So really that old school RUC should really be flushed out now, or certainly there'd be very few left.
Most of them, yeah. When I first started journalism, the PSNI, the RUC press office was actually staffed by police officers. I was actually talking about this to someone yesterday, because me, from West Belfast, starting, week freaking one or whatever it was, journalism, I remember phoning up the RUC press office about there was searches going on there was a house up in, close to, it was Twinbrook, and I phoned up the press office and I said, look, you're raiding a house in Twinbrook, can I get a statement from you? And this RUC woman said, we don't raid houses, we search them. I'm like, it looks like a raid to me, but anyway. So all of those roles were civilianised under the PSNI. All those desk roles were all civilianised, and they were trying to take as many police officers to do policing work and taking them out of roles that could easily be done by administration staff and civil servants. So all of that has changed.
Yeah. Sometimes
the better and sometimes not. I sometimes think back to the nostalgia of an RUC, a big RUC woman. I always used to imagine them sitting in their uniform, quite angry every time the media phoned them up, answering the phone. But yeah, that has changed.
Do they speak your language now? Like they'd know what a raid is?
Well, it was just that she was very upset at me trying to claim that the RUC were somehow putting people's doors up the hall and raiding their houses. But yeah, you mean a lot of them would be people in the past. You've had like former journalists go and work in the PSNI press office, and now they're just civil servants or people who came from other government press offices and things like that. It's a much more efficient, I think, process. And while we have our problems, and we always do with press offices, no matter who runs them, in the main, at least if they're civilians, you can who you're dealing with, and you get to know the name and you get to know the person. But yeah, it was very different when I first started journalism. It was probably much more colourful than it is now.
Well, we look back and we think that, but So listen, it's Friday. It's been a busy week. It's probably wine time soon, is it?
Well, I have 2 things to do, and then after that, I think it's definitely wine time, Nicola.
Yeah. Oh, I do. I seriously do. I think this weekend is going to be messy. I can just.
Well, you know that I have to avoid you in all social settings, because that's basically messy. It's probably the best way to describe it.
No, we'll be much more business-like from here on in.
Yeah, that's good. Tell our editors that.
Right. Well, listen, we'll talk next week, and we'll see what we have to discuss then. I imagine the Kenova Report shortly, but maybe not that immediate.
No, probably maybe not by next week, but yeah, there's plenty of other things happening next week in the world of crime and security. So I will get a chat with you about that next Friday.
So from Dublin over and out.
Exactly. Yeah, let's get the white on chill.